Hello, it's Mike Hall with Parkland College and the East Central Research Foundation. I want to tell you about a CDC Blackstrap Dry Bean study that was conducted across Saskatchewan at various AgriArm locations, including us, in 2019. The study was led by Garry Hnatowich with ICDC, and the results were recently shared at the AgriArm Research Update. Now, here's our condensed version of his presentation. But first, let's ask why Blackstrap dry beans? Well, they're a high-value crop. They have a relatively high yield potential. They would help to diversify your cropping options. They have resistance to common bacterial blight, and their pod set is relatively high. Dry beans are also a highly traded pulse crop. From this table of global pulse production, you can see the production of dry bean far exceeds the production of either chickpeas, dry peas, lentils, or broad beans. Now, let's go out to the Yorkton field site where I'll give you a little introduction to this study. Here we have Blackstrap Dry Beans. This trial is an inoculant trial that was created by Garry Hnatowich from ICDC. And this trial is being conducted at various AgriArm locations across Saskatchewan. The objective of this trial is to evaluate the efficacy of various inoculant forms with and without 80 pounds of actual nitrogen. There are two problems to growing this crop. One, inoculant is produced inconsistently by multinational companies because there are relatively few acres of this crop. The second problem is these dry beans also aren't strong nitrogen fixers. They don't nodulate very well. If you look down the line here, you can clearly see the dark green stripes, which is where we put the 80 pounds of nitrogen. The light green stripes are various forms of inoculant, and they don't seem to be working too well for my eye at this location. Well, let's go have a closer look and see if we can find any nodules. Okay, I'm going to have to talk fast because it's starting to rain, but I'm standing in a plot that's received inoculant on the seed and granular inoculant to the side. It hasn't received any starter nitrogen. The crop looks pretty nitrogen deficient to me in this plot, but let's dig up one plant and see if I can find any nodules. I don't really see much in the way of nodules there, but maybe the other sites had better luck. We'll just have to wait and see. So the inoculant treatments tested include a control, no inoculant, a peat formulation, and a granular formulation. The inoculants were obtained from a company in the US. The peat formulation contained a self-sticking agent, but a damp application method of inoculation was used to assist with adhesion. The peat was also applied using a mixture of molasses and water. These two treatments were applied at each site shortly before seeding. The peat formulation, applied as a polymer, was done by a commercial applicator on May 10, a week or two before seeding. The granular formulation was applied with the seed in furrow. Each of the inoculant treatments either received no added nitrogen or enough nitrogen to raise soil levels to 80 pounds per acre. When averaged over location, inoculant did not significantly affect dry bean yield, whether nitrogen was applied or was not applied. This was true for all sites individually except Indian Head. However, the inoculant differences at Indian Head were inconsistent, and yields at that site were very low. So here are the Indian Head yield results for each inoculant treatment with and without added nitrogen. As mentioned, the yields are quite low, particularly if the nitrogen was not applied. The yield response to added nitrogen was also quite strong at Yorkton and Scott. At Redvers, the yield response to added nitrogen was weaker, and this was also true for Outlook. Outlook was under irrigation and has had a long history of growing dry beans. As a result, rhizobia suitable for dry beans must have already been present in the field, as Garry was able to find pink, actively performing nodules, even on the roots of the untreated checks. This likely accounts for the high yields and the relatively low response to added nitrogen at this location. If we omit the irrigation site at Outlook, we had a 615 pound per acre yield response to added nitrogen when averaged over the dryland sites. This is easily an economic response if you consider that Blackstrap dry beans are currently being purchased for 34 cents a pound. So here's some general observations. Inoculation failed to provide a dry bean yield response. Application of 80 pounds of nitrogen per acre, which includes what was in the soil, resulted in a significant yield response at all sites compared to unfertilized treatments. At all sites, CDC Blackstrap dry bean were direct combined. While yield loss harvests were not measured, observed losses at all locations seemed slight. Solid seeded dry beans under dryland production appears to be feasible. So why did the inoculant fail? Soil nitrogen was not high enough at any location to inhibit rhizobia infection. However, Garry has some thoughts of some possible reasons. Rhizobia strain specificity is known to occur within classes of dry bean. This is not overly surprising. But Garry says it's also possible one strain might be acceptable in one variety, but not another. So it's possible that the strains we were using were not specific for the class or even the variety of dry bean used in this study. It is also possible that the rhizobium within the inoculants was not well adapted to Saskatchewan soil conditions. You can see that these interactions, along with a limited number of dry bean acres, would be discouraging to inoculant manufacturers. So for those wishing to grow Blackstrap dry beans, it would appear the application of nitrogen will be key. Exactly how much nitrogen should be applied will hopefully be the subject of next year's study, if successfully funded. As always, we'd like to thank Adopt for financially supporting this demonstration.